Thinking about purchasing Elden Ring, but you're not sure how it's going to fare on your components, definitely don't miss this video because we're going to get some details, right? Say hi.
Hi.
We'll be right back after this, guys. Blip, blip. Blip, blip. So welcome back to 2020 Tech for You, and as you know from the intro, we're going to be looking at Elden Ring and actually putting these graphics cards up against it. Now before we get into Elden Ring, I'm going to let you guys know about the minimum specs and the recommended specs. That way you could get an idea of what they consider, the developers, what you should be using in your system or something comparable to these specs. So I'm going to show you guys the graphics cards I used before we go into the system I used, all the details of the system. First we use a GT210, 1 gig, so yeah, there's this card. We use the GT710, which is that thing right there that says MSI in all white letters. We use the GTX 460, an ASUS one right here. An ASUS 5770 right here. All these cards are 1 gig, by the way, the older ones. We used a AMD Ryzen 3200G, so those are our lower end. And just to let you guys know, most of these didn't even boot the game. We used an Nvidia GeForce GTX 1660 Super by ASUS, the OC 6GB right there. We used a 2060 Super Founders Edition over there. We used an AMD Radeon 5700 RX 5700 XT Red Devil over here. And we used an Nvidia GeForce RTX 3060 Ti by MSI, the Gaming X right there. And again, guys, don't forget timestamps down below if you're here for a certain config. So the minimum requirements, if you've taken a look yet at any of them, you'll notice that for minimum specs, those are pretty solid machines. Seriously, they are not anything to laugh at. If this is the PC you have with these types of specs, well, you got a pretty good gaming PC. So what are the minimal specs? For CPU, they call for an Intel Core i5-8400. That was a 6-core, 6-thread processor, so no multi-threading. It had a max boost of 4.0 gigahertz or a base of 2.8 gigahertz, and that processor came out Q4 of 2017. So that's a pretty good processor. 6 cores, 6 thread is more than enough to run any game. 6 cores, 12 threads, really great sweet spot. For AMD, they call for an AMD Ryzen 3 3300X. Is a 4-core 8-thread processor. Again, another decent processor. This is not a bad processor. It has a max boost of 4.3 gigahertz with a base clock of 3.8 gigahertz and came out April of 2020. So for GPUs, they call for an Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 3 gig. Still, all in all, it's a great GPU. And for AMD, they call for an AMD Radeon RX 580 4GB. Great card. I got one of them right there. CPUs and GPUs on this list for the minimal requirements are not bad graphics cards. And for RAM, they advise you have at least 12 gigabytes of RAM and at least 60 gigabytes of free disk space. You could go get yourself a 240 gigabyte Inland Premier SSD for probably about 40 bucks and you're done. You got this game on there and you'll still have like over 100 gigs of free space. So throw some screen captures on there too while you're at it. Now those are minimum specs. So pretty much what I see here is any components from about 5 years ago will be perfectly fine. Really and truly, they're always going to overdo it, even in the minimal specs, because they don't want you to play the game and get a bad experience. Be it real low frame rates, playing with all the settings down on low just to get it going. They don't want this, even for minimal specs, because it makes the game look bad. Now, I wish I had one of these graphics cards in my hands to actually try it at these minimal specs. I really do, but I didn't have any like that. And the cards you saw me show earlier, the older cards, those are 1 gig variants. They couldn't even boot the game. So now let's get into their recommendations. So they're calling for Intel CPU i7-8700K, and that processor is a 6-core 12-thread processor with a base clock of 3.7 gigahertz and a base of 4.7 gigahertz. I mean, the 8700K, I'm pretty sure nobody out there will put that processor down. That is a great gaming processor, and that processor came out at the end of 2017. For AMD, they call for a Ryzen 5 3600X. And this is also a 6-core 12-thread processor. It has a base clock of 3.8 gigahertz with a boost of 4.4 gigahertz. That processor came out 7 of 2019. Now let's go to the recommended GPUs. For Nvidia, they call for a GeForce GTX 1070 8GB model. This GPU came out in June of 2016. It's still a decent graphics card. And for AMD, they call for a Radeon RX Vega 56 8GB. Try to make sure you get yourself a graphics card with at least 4 gigabytes of video memory. I mean, 3 will be barely scraping by. 4, you should be fine. I think at 1440 high, I saw about 4.5 gigabytes of VRAM being used. For RAM, recommended 16 gigabytes. I think everybody out there should be running 16 gigabytes of RAM if they have a system within the last 5 years, and at least 60 gigabytes of free space. So yeah, the free space isn't going to change because the game size file is the game size file. So that's never going to change. I'll put the minimum again right here, and I'll put the recommended again right here. And now real fast, let's go through the PC that I'll be using. Obviously, it's on an open air test bench. This test bench, I actually will have a video going up soon on actually how to assemble it, how to put it together. If 1 or 2 people get help out of that video, I'm happy with that. So that video will be going up soon, and I will put the name of the case right here if you guys are interested. And don't forget, links down below for everything in this video, guys. Links for all of this stuff. If you use the links down below to our Amazon affiliate, we do receive a small commission. To those of you who have been using our links, thank you very much. We really do appreciate it, guys. Don't forget, like, subscribe. All these things help. Don't forget, liking and subscribing does not cost you $1, not a dime. It's free. Please hit that subscribe button. That way YouTube knows to recommend these videos. So the system we're going to be using is an AMD Ryzen based PC system. So CPU wise, we are using an AMD Ryzen 5800X. That is an 8-core 16-thread processor that is being cooled by an ROG Ryo 240mm CLC closed loop cooler. I took the fans out from that kit and I put 2 120 Corsair maglev, the ML fans on here. I found those are a lot better than the ones that actually come with the ROG Ryo. I got a video on that too. I'll put a link here if you want to see a little bit more about that cooler. For the motherboard, we're using an ASRock X570 Steel Legend. It's the non-Wi-Fi. That's what this is down here. It's just a Wi-Fi card. You know, for a $200 board, it's got decent VRM cooling. It's an okay board. It's nothing great. Thermal paste, for those of you who are interested. Thermal Grizzlies Hydronaut. For RAM, we're using 2 8-gig sticks, so 16 gigabytes of RAM. A lot of people may put 32 or 64 gigabytes when they're testing gaming. I am not doing any type of screen captures. I am not having Chrome up or anything. This is a fresh Windows install. I've deleted all types of bloatware. I just wanted a clean install to get the best representation of the numbers for you guys as I could. They're Trident Z RGBs, and I have them running at 3600 mega transfers per second. The timings are a little loose at 18, 22, 22, 42. I just enabled DOCP and just let it do it by itself. That's it. Anytime I tried to mess and try and tighten up the timings, it would give me hiccups. So DOCP was fine, left it like that. I used an EVGA non-modular 500 watt power supply. There's really no reason to go higher. It's not like I put a 3090 on this or 6800 or 6900 XT on this. The graphics card that probably pulled the most power would probably be the 5700 XT Red Devil, and it pulled probably around 220 watts maybe, I think. I may be wrong, I may be lying to you, but never did I see it pulling more than a couple 200-300 watts total system use. And again, this is an open air test bench, so I was able to keep the temperatures in the room stable through all my testing, which took a couple days, but I kept the room at about 24 to 25 C. This was not really putting too much stress on the CPU, if any at all. The CPU really barely saw any use running any of these GPUs. So real fast, in case I edited out the part that where I actually talked about some of the testing methodology I used here, I told you guys about the room temp. 24 to 25C. Oh, BIOS settings. Basically, when I went into the BIOS on the motherboard on the X570 Still Legend, all I did was turn on CPU enhancement, DOCP for the RAM, and that was it. I didn't go in there and take all the CPU cores and lock them at one frequency. No, I didn't do that. I let the CPU handle its own boosting logic and all that. All I did was turn on the CPU enhancement stuff, and that was it. For the GPUs, the software I'm going to be using across all the GPUs is going to be MSI AfterBurner. The reason why is not because I overclocked the graphics cards, which at the end of the video I will tell you what happened when I did overclock the graphics cards, the ones that booted into EldenRing for that matter. But in the beginning, no. All I did was raise up the fan curve, make sure these GPUs stood nice and cool to make sure they would boost longer, hit those higher core clocks, and not give me any problems running throughout the game. Nvidia Tuner is how I actually got the numbers, knowing how much wattage was being pulled, the CPU temps, GPU temps. So if you do not know what MSI AfterBurner is, it's basically a software that lets you move sliders for the voltages, the memory clock. Oh, this is for your graphics card, mind you. So if your graphics card is starting to show its age, or even a brand new graphics card, especially even a brand new graphics card, download MSI AfterBurner. I'll put a link down below for it. Download that software and you'll be very happy that you did. You'll be able to move some sliders, get some more power out of your graphics card, raise up the fan curve. If there's anything you do, definitely turn up the fan curve on your GPU. The cooler you could keep your GPU, the longer it'll hit its boost clocks. Or hit auto and let MSI AfterBurner handle that for you. This way, again, your GPU, you'll be able to get a lot more out of it. So that's what I use across all the graphics cards today, just to make sure the GPUs are running nice and cool, but I left them all at their stock frequencies. I didn't mess with anything else, not till the end. Again, we'll talk about that at the end of the video. Timestamps down below, guys, if you're here for a certain reason. AMD or Intel, if it has integrated graphics, basically you don't need a GPU. You'll be able to get video from either one of these processors as long as that processor has that capability. AMD Ryzen processors that end with the letter G, like 3200G, will definitely have onboard graphics. Intel, you gotta actually go out of your way to find the one that doesn't have integrated graphics, because majority of them have integrated graphics. The reason why I wanted to bring this up real fast about these processors that have graphics integrated into them is RAM speed. Basically, if you're using a CPU integrated graphics, you want to buy the fastest set of RAM you can afford. And the reason is a graphics card like this one has memory modules on the card and the GPU die is in the center. So all the memory is right here and the GPU is right here. So it could speak back and forth really fast. With an iGPU, they have to use the system RAM. So the sticks that are on the physical board. So they have to go from the socket to the DIMM slot back and forth. So the faster the RAM sticks you have, basically the number when you go to buy them. So you may see 2133 MHz, mega transfers per second. You see 3600, 4000, 5000. That represents the speed at which the CPU and the RAM stick actually speak back and forth. In the back of that, you're going to see two letters say CL. That's cast latency. And it'll be something like 18, 22, 22, 34, 16, 18, 18, 32. Whatever it is. Those numbers are representing how fast it can locate whatever files in the memory. Those numbers matter too, a lot. So the tighter those timings are, how fast your sticks are, the lot better your integrated graphics on your CPU is going to run. So definitely, if you plan to make a small gaming PC, like I did with the Inwin Chop-In or something similar, I'll put a video here for that one too, definitely get the fastest sticks of RAM you can afford. Hopefully you understood what I said. So now I'm going to talk about the GPUs that didn't boost. The reason being is maybe some of you have something similar to these graphics cards and you're curious, I wonder if EldenRing will work. So if you're planning to buy EldenRing and you have one of these GPUs, yeah, don't buy EldenRing. Unless you are planning to upgrade sometime soon to a more recommended GPU. So the GT210, no boot. The GT710, no boot. The GTX 460, no boot. The HD 5770, no boot. Now these cards have only 1 gig of video memory. So yeah, no booty, no go, no booty. And they are also super old, 2010-ish. So yeah, no, not gonna work. So the reason I tried them is I was bored. They were sitting up there. I haven't brought them out in a while, and I was like, let me throw them on and see what happens. It only took a minute for it, well, not to boot. Now for the GPUs that did actually post. We're gonna start with our APU, the AMD Ryzen 3 3200G. So for those of you out there who may be rocking integrated graphics, Ryzen 3200G, 3400G, 5600G, 5700G, any of these, well, you're going to get a better understanding of how your integrated graphics will run EldenRing. And mind you that this is only a 4-core, 4-thread processor, and just like the 56 and 5700G, it's still on the older Vega 8 graphics, so you'll still get about the same, but a little bit better with the 56 and 5700Gs. They're going to have more GPU cores, they're going to be faster, and on a better architecture. I would say you'd get anywhere from 7% more better experience from those ones than you would with this one. But this one did boot, and I was able to play the game. Real fast though, the base clock speed of this is 3.6 gigahertz, and it has a boost of 4.0 gigahertz, and it only has 4 megabytes of L3 cache, where the 5600G I think has 12 megabytes. I'll put that right here in case I'm wrong. And L3 cache is very important for gaming, so that is a very low cache for the L3. Definitely these other ones will, the 56 5700G is going to play this game a lot better. You get a little better experience at least. But again, you're planning to upgrade to a GPU, because this isn't something you're gonna want to game on. Just because I was able to boot and play on it doesn't mean it was playable. And this CPU, like all Ryzen CPUs, is overclockable. So you could go into the BIOS and actually fine tune it and get a little bit more performance out of it. And another good thing is that this one does come with the Rate Stealth cooler, so that cooler is more than enough to keep this CPU in check. I had it on here with this AIO or CLC, but yeah, you could run it with the Stealth cooler and still get about the same performance as I did. So at 1920 by 1080 max settings, it was in the teens. It was anywhere between 13 and 17 frames per second, so you can only imagine the barf fest. Like, literally, it got me sick to my stomach. So yeah, that wasn't really a good experience. It was pretty bad. Dropped the settings down to high, got out of max, went down to high, and I started seeing more like 27, 26 frames per second out of this little processor. The graphics cores were pegged at 98%, and the CPU cores were between 80 and 96% utilized. The temperature was about 45 C. If you drop the settings down to medium in 1080, you'll see more low to mid 30 frames per second. It's going to be all over the place. That's another thing about EldenRing. Even with a top-notch system, there's going to be stuttering. It's a port, so it's going to have its issues. EldenRing, whenever you enter a new area, you're going to hit a lot of stutters. It's going to be juddery. I was able to play it. I was able to stay in the 30 frames per second range at medium settings, 1920 by 1080. Do a mix between low and medium settings, and you should be able to lock it somewhere around 32, 33 frames per second, maybe even 35 frames per second. But it's also going to be stuttery. You're going to get stuttered. Now we'll just move straight to our GPUs, and we're going to start off with, well, one of my highly recommended GPUs for a beginner, somebody who's just getting into PC gaming, or somebody who's trying to build a budget system when building a budget system was actually possible. The 3200G was removed from the system, and the Ryzen 5800X was put back into the PC. So here I have pretty much your basic run-of-the-mill Nvidia 1660 Super. This is the Asus OC 6GB edition. We'll start with 1920 by 1080 max settings. It was getting, well, pretty much 50 to 60 frames per second, between 52 and 60 back and forth. This game has a lot of stutters in it naturally. Whenever you load new areas, it just seems to have that problem. But when you go in caves and less open world areas, you're not going to get any stuttering. They would be more or less locked at 59, 60 frames per second. It was at 97% usage and stood at 65C through the entire gameplay. And yeah, besides the random stutters, it ran great. And again, this is the software. This isn't the GPU's issue. The GPU is perfectly fine. When I lower the settings from max down to high, even in medium, it ran the same as max. If anything, I say leave everything at high. Just again, turn off motion blur, excuse me, and the other setting, I'll put it here. Turn those two off. You don't want them. It's like smearing Vaseline on the screen. Now at 1440p max settings, it dropped down to the mid 40s to the low 50s. So it was anywhere between 47 frames per second to 53 frames per second. It was more or less at 49, holding more or less 49 frames per second. 40 to 50 frames in a game like this, guys, again, it caps out at 60 frames per second. 40 to 50 frames per second is more than playable. Switching all the settings down to medium, again, we're in 1440p. It was the same as high, but sometimes it would hit 60 frames per second. Find a good mix of high and medium settings, turning off those two settings. You should have no problem staying in the high 50s, maybe even seeing 60 frames more often or not. But it would definitely run really nice. Medium settings, 1440p, some high settings here and there. At 3840 by 2160. At max settings, low 30s. It was staying 32, 33, 31, sometimes dipped down to 29 frames per second. If you switch it down to high, it's the same. Because guys, seriously, max settings and high settings, you really don't see the difference. You see a difference between medium and high, low to medium, but high to max, you really don't see any difference at all. Medium was pretty much the same, so yeah, no surprise there. It's not a 4K GPU. It's really even not in 1440, but it did run this game because again, it's capped at 60 frames per second. So you can run this game at 1440p, medium to high settings, and have a 55, 60 frames per second game play. So yeah, there's no reason you can't with this card. I did it right here. Staying with the theme of Team Green, we have our RTX 2060 Super Founders Edition at 1080p, max settings, 60 frames per second. It sat at 90% usage, 70C. It ran great, no problems, nothing to talk about. We're talking 1080p, max settings at a game, again, that caps out at 60 frames per second. This card is going to hold that with no problems, no issues. It's just going to run the game, well, perfectly fine. So 1440p max settings, low 50 frames per second, so around 52, 53 frames per second. But again guys, max settings doesn't make any sense. High to medium settings, you will not see much of a difference from max to high. Aiden's in the back eating pizza right now, so you guys may hear him in the background, but just keep your settings high to medium, and again, those two settings off. Now the GPU starts seeing about 97% usage and was sitting at about 75C. Still a lot of headroom. Again, never overclocked it. A lot of headroom there. The temperature was low. We could have literally turned those dials up and actually held probably 60 frames per second at 1440p max settings. But why? High, medium settings, crank some knobs over and be good to go at 1440. High, we saw more 60 frames per second. Some dips down to 58 frames per second. And medium, we saw 60 frames per second. It ran very good. So definitely find a good mix of high to medium settings, and this card will run it perfectly fine at 1440p. Now, once we get to 3840 by 2160, for those of you who like to play on a big screen 4K TV, max settings, low to mid 30 frames per second. It's playable, but not something you want, especially if you're playing in 4K. If you drop the settings down to high, you'll go from the mid 30s up to the low 40s. Medium settings, you're going to see about high 40s, maybe mid 40 frames per second. If you drop it down to low, then you're going to start seeing it hit the high 40s, the mid 50 frames per second. But you're playing in 4K at that point. You really don't want to drop the graphics settings low. You want to try and keep things mid to high. So again, try and find that right mix of high to medium settings that will actually look good in 4K, and you should be able to hold more or less 45 frames, maybe 50 frames per second. And this is more than playable, guys. It is more than playable. But again, this is a 2060 Super. This card is a 1080p killer, you know, doorway 1440p gaming, especially on a game that's capped at 60 frames yet again. But that's the 2060 Super in a nutshell, playing EldenRing. Again, great card, 1440p. If you're playing on a big screen TV, throw it on 1440p, find your good mix of medium to high settings, and enjoy the game on a big screen TV. There you'll start seeing your 55-60 frames per second more locked in. Switching over to Team Red, AMD. So we have the Power Color AMD Radeon RX 5700 XT Red Devil. That is a mouthful. This is an 8GB graphics card. I've edited on this card pretty much every video on this channel. Only the past couple videos I've edited have been on my newer 3060 Ti, 1920 by 1080 max settings, 60 frames per second. I saw a lot of stuttering. I have to say it's a driver issue. I'm hoping by the time this gets published, those driver issues have been resolved. I'll let you guys know. I'll test it again, and I'll put an annotation up here if it actually got solved or anything. And I saw that even when I dropped down from max down to medium settings, and the graphics card was barely getting any usage, maybe 80%, 70% usage, and it was only at about 75C. So yeah, a lot of headroom here again too, but a lot of stuttering. Again, I have to say this is a driver issue. I deleted the Radeon software, I deleted the drivers, I DDU'd everything, as I did with every card that I put in, and reinstalled the drivers, redid everything, and still I saw the stuttering. Now at high, it was about the same. It was playable, just gets annoying with the stuttering, and it happens again in mostly open mapped areas. You get a lot of it in those areas. When we dropped down to medium settings, it was better. The stuttering was not as often or harsh, but again, I feel there's a driver issue, which it will get better. They do eventually address these problems. Enough people complain about it, they do address them. 2560 by 1440 max settings, mid 50s to 60 frames per second. High was the same. Medium, a lot less stuttering. Again, find the right mix of medium and high settings, and it was more than playable at 1440p. 3840 2160 max settings, 38 to 40 frames per second. Lots of stuttering, and high was the same. Medium settings between high 40s to low 50 frames per second. So 1440p, mid to high, pretty much like that across the board with all the graphics cards that we tested today. The 3060 Ti is the last GPU we tested on our list, and as you can tell, this GPU is very what is this? This ain't the 3060 Ti. Yeah, no, this ain't the 3060 Ti if you guys haven't noticed. But yeah, it's in my system right now over here, and I'm not gonna take it out because it's in the loop. But this is the graphics card. It's the MSI Gaming X, and it does have 8 gigs of GDDR6 memory. So 1920 by 1080 max settings, 60 frames per second. GPU was between 80 and 90% usage. It ran like that pretty much from max to high. Medium, at medium the usage dropped down from 80 to 90% to 60 to 70% because we dropped the graphics down to medium at the lowest. And yeah, it sat nice and cool at about 60C, no problem. 62C. It just totally demolishes 1080p max settings, no problems. 1440p max settings, 60 frames per second. Some dips here and there, but again, this game does have its little stuttering issues. At high, it was similar. Medium, well, 60 frames per second, 70% usage. 3840 by 2160. Max settings, high 40 frames per second with spikes into 50 frames per second. Now the GPU was sitting at 99% usage. So again, max settings, always going to be an issue, especially at 4K. High settings, it stood in the low 50 frames per second. It did not drop in the 40s. Medium, it was about the same as high. So if you want 4K with this GPU, then again, find a balance between medium and high settings to get a more stable 50 frames per second, which is more than playable. Again, mess with those knobs and those dials in MSI AfterBurner, and you'll probably get even more frames out of this graphics card in 4K. that's all the GPUs I tested and the CPU I tested against EldenRing. And don't forget guys, timestamps down below as always. All this stuff is down in the description. It'll take you straight to our Amazon affiliate account. And again, we do receive a small commission. So thank you to everybody out there who uses our links. Don't forget guys to like and subscribe these videos. Hit the bell down in the corner to get notified if any new videos come out, because I have some pretty cool videos coming out. I got a new motherboard that MSI hooked up with EK. They have a water block on this motherboard. It's a very beautiful motherboard. We're going to be doing an unboxing and I'm going to explain things on the board. So if you don't want to miss that video, please don't forget to hit the bell. Now again, I did all this at stock settings. All I did was change the fan curve to make sure the GPUs could boost longer and let them do their thing. But once I started messing with the sliders, allowing them to pull a little bit more power, mess a little bit with the memory, things like that, I did see an increase that was worth actually moving the sliders over. And I tell a lot of you out there that MSI AfterBurner will not allow you to damage your card. Move the sliders over. Worst case scenario, your computer crashes and you restart your PC. As long as you do not hit the button in MSI AfterBurner that says start on Windows startup. As long as you do not hit that button, when the next time your PC boots up, it'll boot up as if you never put that overclock on your graphics card. If you hit that button, then it's going to try and add that overclock at the beginning of your PC boot and your computer is going to crash again. But even that's not a problem. Get your computer into safe mode and uninstall MSI AfterBurner and then reinstall MSI AfterBurner, and you don't have to worry about anything after that because it'll be a fresh install of MSI AfterBurner. So really and truly, there's nothing to worry about turning those sliders. You can only go so far with how much percentage more power it could pull. As the more I pushed these graphics cards as far as I could during EldenRing, that didn't crash, and I did a lot of dirty overclocking. I didn't really sit there and meticulously 5, 10 megahertz here and there. No. I just threw 100 here, 100 there, and then 25, and then 25. I was using higher numbers just till it crashed, then dialed them back. I probably could have fine-tuned them a little bit better, but I didn't. I just wanted to do a quick dirty overclocks on all these GPUs, and doing so, I saw these graphics cards get about 10%, 7% more performance. So all those numbers I read off, take them with a grain of salt. If you turn up MSI AfterBurner, you turn those knobs over, you're gonna get a little bit better performance than those numbers. Again, those are stock for a lot of you out there who may be afraid to turn those sliders. And I don't blame you. A lot of people don't want to add more voltage. But again, the power supply does not push power to your components. Your components pull power from the power supply. So if the graphics card is not saying give me 50 watts, the power supply is not just going to say here's 50 watts. So your GPU's got to say give me 50 watts. So really true, you shouldn't be too worried about adding a little bit more. Just go in there and just add a little bit more. At least turn up the fan curve. At least make sure your GPU is staying nice and cool. And you should see 7, maybe even closer to 12% more performance out of your GPU. Especially if you have an older GPU, you will see a lot more out of it after all these years you've had it. You know, it's probably showing its age. So give it a little bit more juice. Raise up those fans a little bit more, and you'll probably see it do a lot better than it has been. So I really hope somebody out there got some answers. I really do. If you have any other questions, please let me know down in the comments. I usually get back to questions as fast as I can. Give me about 3-4 days. If I don't, try to ask it again. Sometimes I miss questions in there, so I do apologize. And don't forget guys, like and subscribe these videos. Help to get these videos out on the YouTube algorithm to recognize them and start recommending them. Share them with your friends. And don't forget, Amazon links down below to everything in these videos. And if you like the videos, Aiden will say thank you. Aiden, say thank you. Thank you. See, Aiden will say thank you if you subscribe to the video. But you already said thank you. Why are you laughing over there? Alright guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Late. What are you watching over there, kid? What you watching? Is that a monkey?